So I promised before that we would talk more about the Constitution and federalism. And as I do that, I want you to keep in mind a question. How much of what the government does is acceptable intervention in our lives for our benefit, and how much of it is overreach, telling us that it knows better than we do what is good for us? How much do we want the federal government to come in and tell us this is what you need, and how much do we want the federal government to just back off? This is a question that there is no right answer to. It is a question that gets fought over in government by political parties year after year after year, and it's not a fight that is going to go away anytime soon. Okay, so federalism, which I explained in the first unit, is the system in which there are different levels of government that all share authority over the same area and people. So if you're a resident of California, well, you're not just a Californian, you're also American. So there is power over you and the community that you live in that is shared both between your city, your county, your state, and the federal government. All of these different classes of government all have different powers over you and your life. And a federal system of government tries to maintain a balance between those smaller local forces and the larger federal forces. And the reason why we have federalism is because many of the issues we face as a society require a different kind of touch. There are some issues like, say, education, where maybe we do want every state to determine what its people should be learning. I mean, California might focus really heavy on science and engineering and software development because a lot of the biggest companies in the world are right here in California ready to hire us. But maybe if you're growing up in North Dakota, I mean, you could always leave North Dakota, but if North Dakota wants to keep people in its state, maybe it wants to have its education focus on jobs that are more relevant to the jobs that are actually available in that state. So a one-size-fits-all program of education for all 50 states maybe isn't fair. So we want that power to be mostly in the hands of the state. But then there's some issues like discrimination against people of different colors. We don't want states to make that decision. We want to have one rule for everybody. You just don't treat people differently or horribly just because they look different than you. So that's an example of something that we want the federal government to kind of be watching, because some states might be more tolerant of horrible behavior than others. Other issues that federalism deals with today include poverty, homeland security, fighting terrorism, the environment, immigration, healthcare, and some of these issues we pretty much have a clear idea of whether we want federal or state involvement, and some ideas we're still battling it out between the political parties, between citizens, between leaders. We're still trying to figure out what that right balance of federalism should be. Fortunately, in the Constitution, there is a guide for what powers very clearly go to the states and what powers very clearly go to the federal government. So if you were to read through the Constitution, there's 3 types of powers. The first 2 powers are implied powers and expressed powers. Expressed powers are powers that have been enumerated, listed out in the Constitution, and it's not open for misunderstanding. It's very clear if it's a power that's been enumerated. For example, the 16th Amendment very clearly says that Congress has the power to collect taxes from citizens. That's an expressed power because it's just plainly written into the Constitution. Then there are implied powers. Implied powers are powers that are suggested by expressed powers. Implied powers are not written down, but based on the expressed powers, we know they exist because without them, then Congress couldn't do its expressed power. For example, I just said the Constitution says Congress can collect taxes. The Constitution does not say how they may collect taxes. So at some point, Congress decided they would create the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, to be an agency whose only purpose, only goal was to figure out how much everybody owes and to actually collect it and to prosecute, sue anybody that's not paying their taxes. Now, the Constitution does not say anything about the IRS or a tax collection agency, but it's an implied power that Congress has, because if Congress can't do something like the IRS, then it has no way of actually using its expressed power of tax collection. And the Founding Fathers made this idea of implied powers very clear in what's known as the Elastic Clause. The Elastic Clause says that Congress has the power to make any and all laws necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, their expressed powers, and all other powers vested by the Constitution and the government of the United States. That means the Congress and our government has the power to do whatever they think is reasonable, is necessary, in order to exercise, to use the expressed written out powers. Now, there's one third and final class of powers, and that is inherent powers. And these powers are not expressed, they're not written down, and they're not implied because many of them aren't really related to anything at all in the Constitution, but our government has them because inherent powers are powers that are recognized as belonging to all sovereign nations. For example, our government doesn't specifically say that presidents are allowed to meet with foreign leaders, but we just assume that our government, our leader, our president needs to, because we need to have a relationship with other foreign powers. So even though the Constitution doesn't say it, that's just something all governments expect their leaders to do. All people expect their leaders to meet with foreign leaders. So that's an example of an inherent power. As we grow and gain more and more states, what happens if those states have wildly different laws? What if they have different laws for getting married, different laws for banking, different laws for job licenses? They were worried there were so many different states and so many different ideas of what's right and what's not right that things could get overly complex. So they also built into the Constitution the full faith and credit clause, which requires states to honor the public acts and court proceedings of other states. So what's that mean? That means, for example, if you get a driver's license in California, then any other state that also has driver's licenses must recognize that license. Otherwise, if you were going to Vegas, you would be driving illegally halfway there because your license would expire at the border. The full faith and credit clause makes sure that things like your driver's license, your marriage license, if you adopt a child, whatever legal documents or agreements you have in the state that you live in, don't expire when you go to another state. That's the full faith and credit clause. The judicial branch, especially the Supreme Court, regulates the federal system. States, cities, the federal government regulates the entire federalism system by settling disputes, arguments, disagreements between the national government and the states. So if there's a conflict between, say, legalization of marijuana, abortion, gay marriage, immigration, and the states and the federal government just can't come to an agreement, the Supreme Court is the one that reads the Constitution and then makes clear who has the right to decide. That's all there is to know about federalism for this unit. If you have any questions, please let me know in class. Thank you.